Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Daffy's Table. Today, I'm joined by the one, the only Kayla Roach. And my friends, this is a super interesting episode that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. I went in there with a plan to talk to Kayla about garter snakes and skinks, and we did. But we also went off on a tangent about social behaviors and reptiles, and that very quickly became the main topic of this episode. Join me as Kayla drops some hot takes and discusses interesting opinions on co-habing reptiles and on social behavior and on social hierarchy in reptiles. Like I said, this is a super fascinating episode that I think you will all enjoy. But before we do that, allow me to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this podcast and making this episode possible. Exoterra makes quality products for our pet reptiles to make them feel at home. Also, a quick reminder, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to this on, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other streaming service. A subscribe, a like, a comment, a review. It helps us out a lot, and I really appreciate it. Okay, without further ado, everybody please help me welcome the one, the only, Kayla Roach. Kayla, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to speak with you.
I'm very excited to speak with you as well. I also love doing these little things and acting like we didn't just have a conversation before the camera.
I know, and acting like we aren't friends and we don't talk on a regular basis.
Yeah. So let's be formal throughout the entire episode and just like, okay, Kayla, so how was your day going?
My day was wonderful. Thank you so much for asking, Fadi.
I love it. Okay, no, for real though, let's get right into it. Kayla, how did you get into the hobby? Tell us the story.
I wish I had a really interesting story, but mine is just like everyone else's.
All stories are interesting stories.
Yes, that is true. But as a kid, I was very fascinated with wildlife. I think my passion actually started with invertebrates because they were more easily accessible in my immediate environment. I could step outside the door and find grasshoppers and ladybugs outside. Sometimes I didn't even have to step outside. Spiders came to me in my room. I felt like some bug lord who attracted them all, when really I just lived in a basement apartment. But that definitely originated the interest in wildlife and the animals around me. And I watched a lot of documentaries, David Attenborough, Jeremy Wade, River Monsters, obviously Steve Irwin, and that just got the curiosity and the fascination going. And I think over time I realized that they're kind of the underdogs, reptiles and invertebrates of the animal world. And even at a young age, I wanted to know why, because to me, they were just like any other animal, the fuzzy ones, the cute ones. And I was so curious as to why these animals were so hated on and portrayed so poorly in the media. So I wanted to become their friend and explore them more and show the world why they're such good animals. So I think that's where it started, and then lived on a farm most of my life. So wildlife and animals were just naturally a part of my life. So that's kind of where it started, I guess.
I love it. And would you say that because of this wanting understanding to know why they're not as appreciated as all these other animals and maybe show the world that, do you think that that's what maybe started you creating content as well?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. I've always had an interest in content creation. Even before I started keeping reptiles, I've been involved with horses most of my life, far longer than reptiles. And I had a little horse YouTube channel, which we do not need to talk about.
I love that. I did not know that. I'm gonna need the link after this.
Yeah, and I would go to horse shows and film people with my little camcorder and then make edits to music of them. And I would do little like barn tours, you know how we do reptile room tours? I would do barn tours. So I think I've always had an appreciation for content creation, but the underlying motive for my current platforms is definitely education and to try to break the stigma and the negative perception of reptiles. That's what's driving me the most right now. But I do love the creative aspect of content creation.
Yeah, and I'll add another one to that for you. Just more stigmas for you to break. Not only is it the stigma of reptile keeping, but I think you also break the stigma of women in reptile keeping, and I think that's why it's
Yes,
also very important for you to be
I
um,
agree.
creating content, because I see you at the expos, and
Yep,
obviously you have so many people always coming up to you, but it's always like it's crazy seeing
yep,
these little like 3, 4, 5-year-old girls running up to you because like you're showing them this is a possibility for them as well, right?
I
And
agree.
yeah, so what
Thank you.
was the motivation? Yeah, no, of course. What was the motivation of flipping from horses to reptiles, or when did it happen, I guess?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked this question because it actually ties hand in hand. So, I live on a farm and I have lived on a farm with my family for most of my life. So, whether I actually owned a horse or not, we always had horses on the property and I rode them, whether it was mine that I purchased and owned or someone else's. So, I think it was in 2016, I I owned a horse and I ended up selling him. His name was Louis because I was about to go to university and school was about to get intensive, and I could tell that my time commitment was dropping, and he was the type of horse that needed daily attention. He needed to be ridden every day, and he was very, very hands on. So I had to come to the tough decision to rehome him to a home who had more time. And then with that money, I was like, well, I would still like to have a pet to call my own that I could, learn about and be committed to. We already have dogs, we have all the livestock outside and cats and everything. And I'm like, I've always wanted reptiles because I loved dinosaurs as a kid. I always wanted one. I'm like, reptiles are the closest thing to him. So I'm like, why don't I use this money from this horse I just sold to get a snake? So I went
I
on
love it. What was
Kijiji.
the snake? Yes,
It
yes,
it
continue.
was a normal ball python. I still have him today. His name is Onyx, and he was my very first snake. And people always made fun of me. They're like, "Why would you sell a horse and get a snake?" Like they thought I was wild. I'm like, "No, no, no. Like I didn't sell my horse to get a snake. It just that's just the way it played out." But I'm happy it did play out that way because look where I am now. I have all these animals, and my passion has only caught on fire and grown even more. And I still have my passion for horses. I still ride, so I found a way to balance the two of them. So I can't complain.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And when did you start keeping inverts?
Inverts,
I'm not talking about
I,
the basement spiders
yes,
you had early on. Like,
yes. My first, yeah, because I guess I kept a lot of bugs I found outside as a kid and I kept them inside, but that's not very ethical per se. So, formally keeping captive bred invertebrates, I would say
formally,
probably
I like
around
it.
2019, 2020. So, I had grown a mini collection of reptiles. I had some lizards and a few snakes by then. And again, it was Kijiji, which for my American or non Canadian viewers and listeners is kind of like a classifieds page where you can buy and sell items or animals, kind of like Craigslist in the States. And
You can find anything on Kijiji.
you find anything. Probably a bad thing, but
Yeah.
um, I found two tarantulas that were free to good home with their enclosures. So I was like, I feel like this is a good opportunity to step foot into this hobby because I feel like it's just the opportunity is presenting itself to me. So my two first tarantulas were a green bottle blue tarantula and a Trinidad chevron tarantula.
That's awesome. Okay, and I
Yeah.
definitely want to dive into your collection and all the animals you're keeping and all the projects you're working on.
Yeah.
But just before we get into all of that, just on the while we're still on the content creation note,
Hmm.
this is an episode we did a while ago, and then the question has just kind of come up and reoccurred, and I've just been asking it to all the content creators that come on. Do you think, ready for this?
I'm ready.
Do you think that influencers should be breeders? Yes, listeners, we're back to this. Do you think that influencers should be breeders? And then flip the question, do you think that breeders should be influencers? Does that make sense?
Yes. So do you think the two go hand in hand, essentially?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of, or not?
Or does one require
Okay, here's
does
what
one
I
require the
say.
other? Yeah,
I
hit
don't
me.
think being a content creator or an influencer should reflect on your collection at all and what you do at home at all. I think you should do at home with your animals what you're passionate about. If you want to take on breeding, do it and share it online and, you know, try to educate others. If there's a certain species you want to work with, do it because you want to, not because there's this idea that you should be portraying yourself a certain way online and gain more views and all that. So I guess the answer to my question is don't let your role as an influencer or a content creator change or cloud your vision and how you keep at home or what you do with your animals at home. I think you should just do what you think is right for the hobby and what you think is right for you, and then share it online or don't. That's up to you. But that's how I view it.
Kayla Roach, everyone. Wonderful
Thank you,
answer. I
thank
love
you.
it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, awesome. Now that we've covered that, let's dive into the animals. What are you currently keeping? I think most people that are watching this probably already know what's in your collection, but maybe just a quick general
Yes.
rundown.
So for those who don't know, I have quite a diverse collection at the moment, but as I progress as a keeper, I can see that my focus is narrowing down and I'm discovering which species I'm most passionate about. So I'm not going to list every species I keep because there's quite a lot, but I'll list the standout ones or the ones that mean the most to me. So I'd say my projects I'm most passionate about or the species I love the most are my Emerald Tree Skinks and all my garter snakes. I have a lot of species and subspecies of garter snakes. And those who know me well know I love boega cat snakes. So you'll find those in my collection as well. Outside of that, I have a variety of colubrids, some small lizards that aren't very common, ocellated skinks, tachydromus, a few cool geckos from Australia and Southeast Asia, and a Fiji banded iguana. Sorry to my Americans who are watching.
I
But
did
yeah,
not know you had a Fiji banded iguana. That's awesome.
yeah, it was a recent acquisition from this summer. I'm very, very
Nice.
happy.
Okay. Congratulations. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. It was a dream species of mine, so I'm happy to knock that off the list.
It seems like all the Canadian content creators are getting them one by one. I feel like I need to be next, but I don't
You're
really have the
next,
space
Mike.
or the time for them. I'm trying to go like the other way, like less lizards, and focusing more on the snakes because just for time maintenance reasons and stuff.
Absolutely. Oh,
And
I feel
yeah, I
that.
do not want to add a Fiji banded iguana, especially a veggie eater when I barely eat any vegetables. It doesn't make sense.
It's funny you say that because he's the only animal I have outside of my eastern box turtle who eats veggies. And he eats more veggies than I eat, and he eats more than me. I go grocery shopping and I get more healthy stuff for my lizard, my single lizard, than for myself. It's a problem.
It's like the one of the most like our animals eat better than us
Oh, yeah.
is
Oh,
probably should be the motto of like the reptile keeper industry
100%.
or the good people, I guess. I don't know
Yeah. You would
about
think I would
everyone, but
learn a thing or two about diet and nutrition and apply it to
from
myself,
the
but
animals.
no.
Yeah. We're like out here reading all these things about like, okay, you need this much calcium in this and this much
Yeah,
this
all
and
these
this, and
little
you're like learning all
supplements,
these.
and then I'm just like
Yeah,
yesterday I had like a
burger.
double-decker cheeseburger. I'm not even kidding. It's a
It's
problem.
like my daily meal. That's basically all I eat is burgers. I That's hilarious. Okay,
Uh,
cool. So obviously, you have as you said, a diverse collection of things, but you must be focusing on some specific projects. So
yes.
maybe let's dive into those projects. And the first one I want to talk about is obviously the Emerald Tree Skinks.
Yeah.
Um, and then the ocellated skinks, because I think
Yes.
those are fascinating. I think more people should be working with them as well.
I
So my first
agree.
question is, how similar are their temperaments? Because I do have Emerald Tree Skinks.
Yeah.
I see the video of you kind of, with yours running
Yep.
around you. My female will do that. My male hates me. But all the babies that come out are also super like handleable right off the bat. They're super friendly. They tongue feed.
Yep.
So I think they are an awesome animal.
I agree.
I think the ocellated skinks should be to a certain extent the same thing. Do you agree? Like, how's the temperament? Hit us.
They are similar in some ways and very different in others. I think in terms of their behaviors among themselves, because I cohabit my emerald tree skinks with each other and I cohab my ocellated skinks. And
but not
that's a whole
but
other
not
conversation, because when we talk about social behavior in reptiles, I get so excited. So that we'll leave to the side. But I think among themselves, they have some behaviors that are similar, but towards people, I see a big difference. I think it's honestly, I think the ocellated skinks are quite normal. I think emerald tree skinks are abnormal with how friendly and sociable they are. I am not one to anthropomorphize animals and convince people that they love me or they want to spend time with me. Whenever they do come out to see me, it's usually a means to an end, or they've been so habituated with food and positive interactions that they don't mind my presence. Emerald tree skinks, they seek out me, my attention. And there's no other way to put it. I had a hatchling this year, a day old hatchling out of the egg, came running up my arm, up onto my shoulder, and then stayed there. And all my adults do the same thing. I open the enclosure. They're like restless. When they see me walk in the room, they're restless. They're scratching at the door. They're jumping at the door. I open the door. They run up to my shoulder. And once they make it to my shoulder, they're calm. They're not moving anymore. They don't have anywhere to be. They are where they want to be. It's so difficult to understand that behavior because it was not trained. I did not habituate them to behave that way. They just behave that way. And
what
it
do you
is a
think it
big
is? Do you have
mystery.
any it's just a big mystery. You don't have any theory as to why.
I don't, because why should a day old hatchling come to a big predator? That's what I should be in its eyes. That would be a
Right.
healthy reptilian mindset in my eyes. Why should you be approaching it so eagerly and with excitement without knowing that I provide food, I provide some benefit to it, you know? So I don't know if it's curiosity or some complex emotion we're not aware of or we haven't studied, because they are very, reptiles as a whole are very understudied, but emerald tree skinks especially, because I'm convinced there are several localities and maybe even subspecies of emerald tree skink, but no one has dug into it yet. So it's really difficult to tap down on their behavior if we don't even know the species in general yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's definitely a localities thing. I've seen like the imports that come in from Indonesia and the imports that come in from
Yep.
Philippines, and there is a very
Yep.
clear difference in markings and shapes
Yep.
and all of that. So there must be
And
like they're the
facial
same lizard
structure.
and
Yeah.
facials. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. And then obviously there's the olives and the blacks, but I think those are just different
Yes, those are
genuses
separate
completely,
species,
right?
but there's so much
Yeah.
similarity and stuff. But yeah, to continue with my answer, now going to the ocellated skinks,
Yes.
their behavior is very fascinating as well, but it's a lot more what you would expect of a lizard. So I wouldn't label them as very handleable, not even because of their personality, because they are freakishly slippery. They are like a bar of soap. Their scales are so flattened and smooth and solid. They have this really slippery appearance and feel to them that handling them is like handling a bar of soap. But my female, I can get her to walk onto my hand, and that's kind of the extent of handling, because anytime you try to kind of hold them, it's like holding a wet bar of soap. But the ocellated skinks can definitely be habituated to your presence and even seek you out and come to the enclosure when you open the door. But I've noticed it is solely food motivation. It is not like the emerald tree skinks. They're always looking for food. So some of them will eagerly walk onto my hands, but they're sniffing, they're licking, they're exploring, and sometimes they'll even start licking my hand or even biting on it because they're like, "Oh, there's a trace of a scent of a bug on there. So I'm going to bite it and hopefully I'm right." So I've noticed the ocellated skinks are more food driven, which complements my interactions with them. But the emerald tree skinks, food or no food, they're just eager to see me. Sometimes they'll even bypass food to come to me. It's so strange.
Yeah, I don't have that same relationship with mine, but I do know what you mean. I do see like my female does kind of run up to the window as soon as I'm in the room,
Yeah,
and I've always associated with I'm the food bringer. Maybe that's why. But
right.
But it does to a certain extent make sense because she does wanna climb out. Even if I have the tongue on my, she wants to climb out, and sit on my hand. She wants to like sit on
Yes.
my shoulder. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've always just been like she's looking for a way out. She's maybe
Yeah.
trying to jump off. But it's fascinating to think about. Do you think? I don't know if you've witnessed anything like that. Do they react differently when somebody else walks in the room
Yes.
versus you? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Okay.
was
Tell me.
just going to say that. I'm glad you brought it up. So I've
Yeah.
noticed the difference between me and my family or any friends who might come into my reptile room and interact with them. If they notice a different person, even if this individual is not trying to handle them, the enclosure door is still closed. If they notice them in the room, they're not jumping on the door scratching like they normally do. They're a little more on edge and observant. They don't run away, they're not scared, but they're more on the look instead of looking to come to me. And usually when it comes to new people, I have to actually go in the enclosure, grab the Emerald Tree Skink and hand it to them, which is unheard of with me. Usually I come into the room, they're excited to see me, and they jump out onto me. And I'm not associating this with any bond or relationship. I want to make that clear here because I had a day-old hatchling do this exact behavior. So this is completely separate from any training or bonding that I've made with these animals. But I have noticed with my adults who have been exposed to me for years, every day,
Fascinating.
yeah, they behave much differently with me than they do with strangers. It's it's such a mystery, and I think that's why I love them so much because every other animal I keep, I can come to some conclusion about every behavior I witness. But the Emerald Tree Skinks, there's this gap, there's this gray area where I really don't know how to label that behavior. And I don't want to be the type of person to be like, they love people, because no, they don't. Because I have also encountered Emerald Tree Skinks and worked with some who are very flighty. And when they're flighty and nervous,
Yeah.
they are fast. They are not
Bars of soap.
easy to move with. So um, it's really a hit or miss. And when you get that side of them, it is such a joy. You feel like you're having a Disney princess moment with an animal.
Yeah, no, I see it. I see it. They're fascinating animals for sure, and I do hope they become more prominent in the hobby and more people are keeping with them, working with them, and maybe then we can figure it out. But I would say, so do you keep when you had the hatchling? Did you find the egg separated and incubated on its own, or did it just pop up in the enclosure?
Good question. So I was completely hands off with the entire reproductive process with my Emerald Tree Skinks. I have a breeding group in a vivarium together, and I just ensure that they are fed, they're happy, and all their husbandry requirements are met. And they copulated, laid eggs, they incubated, and they hatched in the vivarium all on their own. I was completely hands off. And one thing that I wanted to kind of experiment with is leaving the babies in the enclosure with the parents, because I know most breeders will often just remove the babies out of the enclosure as soon as they hatch, or they remove the eggs in the first place and put them in a separate enclosure from the start. But again, going back to my fascination for social behaviors in reptiles, I know from a lot of research and reading I've done, I want to give a big credit to a textbook I love, The Secret Social Life of Reptiles. I learned a lot from that book and just other research I've read online that many species of skink are known for their complex social behaviors or their group structures. And while this isn't necessarily a generalization for all skinks, a lot of skinks are extremely understudied. So how would we know if they exhibit these social or group behaviors without looking into it? And I can't just rely on scientists and researchers to give me those answers, because then I'll be waiting until I have gray hair. So I figured, as a keeper and a hobbyist, I can contribute, maybe not to research, but to the general pool of knowledge available on this species. And I wanted to know if these skinks have any parental behaviors, or if they interact with their offspring differently than they interact with other adults of the same species. So I left the babies in the enclosure. I also want to preface by saying that I work from home every day, so I'm literally beside my skinks all day long. And I have available enclosures at all times that are planted and spacious in case I need to separate them if something goes wrong. So I'm prepared for this type of experiment, I guess. So I noticed, one of the first things I noticed was the babies riding on the backs of the adults. So the babies would hold on to the back of the adult like a little backpack, and the adult would move around the enclosure with the babies just hanging on. I can't obviously conclude that this means anything. It's just an observation I made. It could simply be that the baby skink doesn't have to expend as much energy because it's using another skink as transport. Or maybe if they're trying to bask, the baby can get a little bit higher to the basking platform or area if it's on another skink. So there's many different variables here, but I just thought it was interesting that in a big enclosure, the babies would always choose, not always, but often choose to go on the backs of the parents. And the most fascinating behavior I witnessed, this one was the one that kind of made my jaw drop a little. So when I'm feeding my Emerald Tree Skinks, usually when there's no babies in there, when I just keep the adults together, it is chaos. I throw crickets in there, they run all over the place, and then one skink will catch a cricket, and then another skink will try to steal it. So then they'll play like keep away, and they'll run around the enclosure and try to take it from one another. And it's just madness and chaos. When I was feeding them with the babies present in the enclosure, I noticed that the adults were much more lenient and forgiving with the babies. So the babies would run up to the adult who had a cricket in its mouth. Normally the adults run the other way, like, you ain't gonna catch this. This is my cricket. I worked for it. But with the babies, it appeared as though they were allowing the baby to feed off of it or to take pieces off of it. It looked like it was feeding the offspring, or at least allowing the offspring to feed itself and take advantage of it, you know? So, and that's a behavior I witnessed multiple times, not just once. And whenever another adult came behind, the skink would run off. But if it was a baby who came up to the skink, it would let it eat the cricket. So that was really interesting because you could tell it was almost making the conscious decision to allow the baby to feed off of its prey item. That I thought was fascinating. Again, it might not be a parental behavior, but I just thought it was interesting to see the contrast between how it behaved around other adults and how it behaved with a baby. There was a difference.
Fascinating. My mind's
Yeah,
blown.
I
My
think
mind's
so
blown.
too.
I also never pull the eggs out and incubate them. I just like you said, they kind of just they do their thing and the babies
Yep.
pop up. But I've seen and heard things online about, oh, the dad ate or the other female ate the
Yes.
baby or whatever. So I pulled them out
Yeah.
immediately. So I've
Yeah.
never seen any of those behaviors. The one thing I did see once though is when I walked in, I had no idea there was babies inside, and I walked in and the dad was or the male was on the basking spot, and the baby was sitting on top of him, almost stretched out, so that
Yeah.
it was getting closer to the basking spot. And that was the only
Yeah.
thing I've ever seen. So for you to say that they have almost like parental care and they're feeding,
Yeah.
I believe it. Like that's fascinating. I
Yeah.
also
And it
once
is
worked
it
with
is documented parental behaviors among many lizards, but some species of skinks are
skinks.
documented in other
Yeah.
species. So it isn't completely wild or unheard of to believe that that could be the case for these lizards as well. So it's interesting. And I ended up separating them after a couple months because they grow pretty fast and I didn't want the enclosure to become overcrowded. So now I have a baby enclosure and an adult enclosure, but I plan on continuing that cycle where I let the babies settle in with the parents for a little bit. And maybe that's why the babies are so friendly with me too, because they see that the parents are friendly with me, so they don't perceive me as danger because they don't see the parents perceiving me as danger. Therefore, they feel comfortable to come see me. That could also be a possibility. So maybe leaving them in the enclosure for a little bit is beneficial, but it's also a danger, of course. There's any time, no matter if a species of reptile is known to be social or not, anytime you add another animal in the enclosure, you automatically increase the risk of encountering a problem, right? So it's possible, even with species who are very social. That's why I'm clear on the fact that I'm home all the time and I have a plan B if I notice that my animals are not getting along together. I'm not just going to leave them in there and be like, figure it out, you know? But
Fight to the death.
fight to the death. The last one
Yeah,
standing gets a cricket.
that's that's hilarious. That's hilarious, and this is so fascinating. And you left them in. You're saying for a couple of months too. Like I was expecting you to say I left them in for a week or so, but
Yep.
a couple of months, so you know that they were leaving
Yep.
them alone. Do you just have a pair?
I have, so now I actually have two pairs, but my newly acquired female is separated on her own and she's in quarantine for the time being. But next year I plan on separating my skinks into two pairs. So what I had prior to this new female, I had two males and a female together in one enclosure. So
Awesome.
it
And
was
the
just
babies were raised with the two males and the female?
with the two males and the female. Yep. And I witnessed that same behavior with the cricket and riding the back with both the male and the female. So it wasn't like a maternal behavior strictly
Mm.
isolated to the female, the dam. It was with the adults in general. So yeah, good.
Fascinating.
Cool,
Yeah, I was
cool
gonna see if
observations.
like having like a external, like like the third male or a third female would have affected that dynamic, but I guess
Right.
not. Or they were at least protective enough of their babies
Yeah.
to kind of tell that third male like this
I
is like
think they
don't touch me.
function
Yeah.
more in terms of social groups or hierarchies more than families because some lizards actually have a preference for family, so offspring and genetically related conspecifics. But I think with emerald tree skinks, it's more the skink, they form like little hierarchies. I know that's the case for ocellated skinks. They form little hierarchies. I like to compare it in a way to horses. It is similar and very different in ways, but with horses, they are herd animals. They are very, very social, and they have little hierarchies. So you have one or two horses at the top of this social order, and then you have some who are very submissive at the bottom, and then some who fall in between. And I've noticed that the ocellated skinks are like that. I know which ones are higher on this pecking order and which ones are more submissive to the others. And I think, in my opinion, that's how they achieve group harmony. If everyone got along from the get go, it's if you look at people too. I live with my family. I love them dearly, but I butt heads with them sometimes. We don't always get along, but that's how you figure out how to work in harmony together. And again, going back to this love I have for social behaviors and reptiles, I think there's a big misunderstanding of sociability in reptiles in the hobby because it often overlaps with cohabitation, and that's a big debated topic in the hobby. But the truth is, in my opinion, all reptiles, to some degree, are social with their own kind. I think it's not a black or white scenario where they're either solitary animals and they're independent their whole life and that's it, that's all, or they're super social and they have families and groups. It's not one or the other. To me, it's a spectrum, a continuum. They're either high on the scale of sociability and they have evolved complex social dynamics, or they are low on the scale and they don't often engage in social behaviors, leading us to, see them as strictly solitary animals. So I think it depends on the species, and I think it also depends on where they fall on this spectrum. And that's why
It's a
there's so much
spectrum.
the spectrum. I think that's why there's so much debate in the hobby as to if you can cohabit certain animals, because the truth is, even in reptiles and species who are highly social and they in the wild live in group dynamics, they still have conflict. In fact, they probably have more conflict with one another than solitary or less social species, because the species who are more solitary or less social evade and avoid those types of interactions. But the animals who are more evolved and their behaviors and their social mechanisms are high on that spectrum, they're more likely to encounter conflict with one another because that's how they achieve group harmony. Again, back to the horses. In order to have a successful, peaceful herd, there's a lot of not fun behavior that goes on to reach that
Bickering.
point. Bickering. Yes, that's a great word. I was trying to have a peaceful word here, but it's not peaceful. It is madness and chaos sometimes in order to achieve that harmony. For example, if I were to buy a new horse and introduce it to my existing herd, it will not just mesh in with the herd immediately. It needs to find its place and its role. And that might mean that the alpha horse will pin its ears, will bite it, will kick it, and even keep it away from food and water sources in order to establish that role. And then eventually, once the horse has accepted its role and it knows its place in the herd, then the bickering will slow down and it will fade away. And that is a herd animal, by far the most social creature you could have. And they fight each other, you know? So I think when people witness this in the hobby, they think, oh no, one animal bit another animal. We must separate them and we must label them as solitary and we can never keep them together at any point because they, so it's a very black and it's a very difficult topic to touch upon because it's hard to first set up an enclosure in captivity that fosters and social behavior and that makes it safe and possible. That's not easy to achieve. And even if you do achieve it, there are those little fluctuations, even in social groups where things do go wrong. So I can see why it's a big debated topic, but I do think people need to learn to determine what is combat and what is just normal, healthy conflict within a group, because that's how they figure stuff out. My ocellated skinks will nip at each other sometimes, and then they respect their space. They have their own little kind of territory in their enclosure, and the other one is like, okay, message received, and then doesn't do that again. And some people would see that singular little bite and be like, oh my God, separate them. They're going to kill each other. When really it's just, no, they're communicating. But they can't use words like we can use. They're just throwing hands, okay? Sometimes fighting doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. But yeah, I just went on a ramble.
Kayla mic dropping. Kayla mic dropping. I love it. I love it. I love it. This is all very, very, very true. All very true. And I think, like you said, it's a big debate in the topic, but it's a big debate based on people seeing one behavior and replicating it, and usually one behavior in one individual of an animal, not even like
is not representative of the entire species.
Of the entire species.
And a lot of the time those behaviors can also be attributed to husbandry or something that lacks from the human caring for them,
Yes.
So
yes.
That's why it's so hard to replicate that in the hobby. And it is safer for the most part to just, like, I would not go and tell people, hey, you should keep all your leopard geckos together, because I don't recommend it. It's definitely safer to keep them isolated. But the truth is, and I might get some flack from this, there is a lot of evidence supporting the fact that leopard geckos are highly social lizards. They have shared areas in the wild where they defecate. They have shared aggregation locations under cover. They even are known to have preference for specific conspecifics, meaning that there is a certain individual or a few certain individuals that they recognize and they prefer to be near, whether that's because that's what's been successful for them long term and they feel safer that way, whatever the reason is, they are known to have specific preferences. These are all signs of social behavior. But again, there are people in the hobby, because leopard geckos are such common pets to keep, who go to PetSmart. They get a 20-gallon or a 10-gallon enclosure. They put a red bulb on it. They put 3 leopard geckos in it. They kill each other because they fight to the death. And then they go, you can't co-have leopard geckos because they will kill each other. Well, yes, it can absolutely happen, but there are many factors that led to that case happening. So maybe if you set them up for success and replicated their natural environment a little better and gave them ample space, you would be able to foster a correct environment to allow the social behavior to take place safely.
I love it. I love it. I think you have just sort of shifted the entire topic of this episode, and this is so much more interesting than what I had planned. So we're gonna stick with this. I think
Okay,
we're gonna
cool.
talk about social behavior for longer. This is so interesting. I 100% agree with everything you just said, by the way.
Yeah.
And I mean, even in certain niches in the hobby, like I've never kept dart frogs with other
Hmm.
species. But I've seen it done repetitively online so successfully, and then you come to talk to some people and they're like, you can't go have dart frogs with other
Absolutely.
species of dart or whatever it is. And I'm not saying do it, do your
No.
research and all of that,
And
but
there are
it
many
has been done successfully,
implications.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are many implications for cohabbing. And I don't want to have create this idea that I am okay with cohabbing point blank. There are so many variables to consider. There are some species I would never even think about cohabbing. I would never keep those animals together, you know? So this isn't like I'm not generalizing here. I'm just saying certain species and certain scenarios work. And there's research that supports it. And some, like garter snakes, I would argue actually do better in group scenarios than on their own. But yeah, it is definitely a very complex topic to discuss because we have people in the hobby who have very black and white perspectives where it's one or the other. I'm in the middle where I look to the left and I go, yeah, no, that is not happening over my dead body. And I have other scenarios where I look to my right here where I'm like, yeah, absolutely. There's research that suggests that this is possible. There are keepers who do it successfully, and I want to learn more about it because it's understudied as well. So I'm going to jump right in and experiment here as a herpetoculturist, you know? So it's a fascinating topic and I love it. And I've always had a fascination for human psychology. That's what I studied in school. And I think learning about social behaviors in reptiles almost ties in my passion for sociology and psychology with my passion for animals in like the same niche, like seeing how they interact with one another and how we perceive it as a hobbyist. There's a lot of psychology that goes on there. So, yeah.
It's fascinating. No, for sure, it's fascinating. And as somebody that likes studying all these social behaviors, and I'm glad you brought up the garter snakes because we're gonna jump there as well. But as somebody that likes studying, there we go, garter snakes. But what attracted you to the inverts that are, people are keeping them solitary. People actually, now my mind's in like 200 different places at once. Before we jump to the inverts, there's also the concept of, if people are experimenting more, how many animals in the wild, and I'm not just saying reptiles, but animals in general, have like symbiotic relationships with
Yes.
plants or with other animals that possibly cohabbing could
Yes.
be benefiting them instead of
That's
being negative. Like there's, yeah.
absolutely. And that's something that you can learn about. I've seen a lot of zoos cohab different species entirely. I don't cohab different species with one another. I only cohab same species within the same enclosure. But I've seen zoos uh, cohab different species of reptiles with even plants that they encounter in the wild. And there's some sort of harmony
Biotope
yeah,
kind of, yeah.
between them all. And that's definitely something that needs more attention in the hobby as well because it's hard to nail down everything that goes on in the wild. It's not just limited to one species and their interactions with another. You know, when I go herping and I flip logs and I flip pieces of tin and stuff, sometimes I find 3 to 4 different species together aggregating under that same piece of cover. So clearly, there's a lot of stuff we're not considering about sociability between the same species and between multiple species. So that's something I love witnessing and experimenting with and learning about.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Okay, so yeah, so as somebody that loves learning about this stuff, how did or why inverts that are like, are you seeing social behaviors in the scorpions and the tarantulas and that as well, or because they're so solitary, kind of just a leave me alone animal, or where do you stand on that one?
Again, I think that's very dependent on the species and where they come from and what their evolutionary, what they've kind of evolved to be. Because the truth is, a lot of social behaviors are a result of evolution favoring that behavior over being solitary. So it really depends on the individual animal. I won't lie, as much as I love invertebrates and keeping them, I am much more of a snake and a lizard person than I am an invertebrate person, at least when it comes to keeping. With my invertebrates, I keep them alone. It's mostly tarantulas that I keep anyways, and we know how savage females can be with males and stuff. But even then, there are people who keep certain tarantulas together, like Monocentropus balfouri, the Socotra Island blue-legged baboon tarantulas, I believe. There are many species of Poecilotheria who can be kept in groups. Many species of scorpions, dwarf scorpions, and rock scorpions I've seen that are kept in groups. Those are not things I have kept myself or experimented with, but I think that my opinion with reptiles transcends into invertebrates too. There are some invertebrates who absolutely cannot be kept in groups. It will not go well. And there are others who do very well. They're either tolerant of each other or they actually have some sort of harmony together where they benefit each other or their behaviors intertwine for the benefit of the group as a whole. So that's definitely something I should be doing more. Now you're getting my gears going, and I'm like, maybe I should see if I can learn more about social behaviors in invertebrates, because even like there are beetles and different phasmids and a whole array of invertebrates that could absolutely be kept in group scenarios. So I'm gonna look into that now.
I love the excitement. This is what these conversations are about, coming up with
Yeah.
these ideas, right? Okay, cool. So I do want to, as I said, jump into the garter snakes and all the awesome behaviors that I'm sure that's one
Yes.
species that I've never kept, but I'm sure has so many little
Yeah.
like um, social behaviors in it. But just before we leave the skinks alone, you talked about sort of the hierarchy in the ocellated skink setup. Is there do do they eat in order of the hierarchy? Like, is it the biggest two coming in first, and then they're kind of going in there, or what are like some of the behaviors that you are seeing in that
Yes,
setup?
absolutely. So feeding is usually chaos and madness, and they all just run around off of instinct to feed, and they're not as receptive to each other's behaviors when they're feeding. Their sole goal is just eat. I'm hungry. I see a cricket, eat it. But I do notice it in terms of occupying space within the enclosure. And I have a spacious enclosure for them and tons of little nooks and crannies. And they're also fossorial, so they can dig underground. So they have a lot of usable space, multiple basking points, and everything. It's more how they interact when two of them face each other. So let's say my mature female is probably the highest on this pecking order as I speak of. And if she's on the basking platform and another individual that is maybe not as submissive, so one who's a little more confident in its behaviors approaches her, they like roll up their neck and puff up and look at each other, and they can tell they're like communicating in their own way, the same way that like iguanas and anoles will like bob their heads and stuff. They don't bob their head, but it seems like it's a similar communication where they're trying to assert their space and make it clear that I'm not moving and you're going to move because so they don't necessarily nip at each other and bite, but you can tell that one will kind of put on this big display and the other will challenge that display and then retreat. And then the one who kind of won that interaction will remain in that occupied space. So it's very similar. I always compare to horses because that is what I know very well. And because horses are highly social herd animals. So it's easier to kind of compare behaviors there when I look at the kind of hierarchy with my ocellated skinks. Horses do the same. If they're all at the hay feeder eating hay together and one horse walks over next to like the alpha horse in the herd, the alpha horse will stop eating, pin its ears, maybe even bite, or I call it like shoo, like shooing them away almost, like get out of my space. So it doesn't become this big explosive event. Sometimes it does, but you can tell that they are continuously asserting their role in the hierarchy. It's not like when they first meet each other, they have that conflict one time and then it's established and harmony is eternally set in stone. They have to continuously remind each other, I'm at the top of the hierarchy. You must respect me and you must respect my space. I see that a lot with horses, and I've noticed that with my skinks too. The one at the top is constantly reminding the others, no, I am going to be here right now and I don't want you to join me. Sometimes they all bask together and they're laying on top of each other. But, you know, they have moods and they have preferences as well, just like we do. And they remind each other of that the same way. If I'm not in a good mood, I'll tell my family, you know what? I'm not really in the mood right now. I don't want to talk about it. You know, it's the same. It's similar in that
I'm
way.
going to my room.
Yeah, I'm going to my room. Leave me alone. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
no, 100%.
they are much more intelligent as individuals and as a group than we give them credit for. And although we are extremely different, we aren't so different in many ways as well.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and I think this is gonna become more popular, more and more popular in the hobby. Just like uh people looking into cohabing same species, like with the Stenodactylus, for example. I don't know if I'd call it a hierarchy, but there's definitely some form of behavior of them knowing that that's the big boss male.
Yes.
That's like the alpha male and the sleeper male
Yep.
almost, and all the females are stay in the same cave as that. They switch back and forth, and
Yep.
sometimes the second male is in that cave too, but other times he doesn't want him in there. He gets first dibs at the basking spot. It's
Yep.
almost like he gets first dibs at crickets, but I don't actually know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's definitely interesting behavior.
Yeah.
Cool. So we talked about social behavior in lizards. Let's talk
Yes.
about social behavior in snakes. I'm sure
Yes.
garden snakes have tons of interesting behaviors.
Absolutely.
It seems that most people that keeping them are not keeping them alone, and most people
Correct.
keep them in pairs or trios or whatever. So, can you run down some garter snake interesting facts for us?
Absolutely. So first, one of the questions I get the most, just to start us off, is why I'm so interested in garter snakes. And I find that a silly question because no one asks that about any other animal I keep. But I think garter snakes are the general consensus is that they're common, they're not that interesting, and they're not like a really interesting pet to keep. And I think the reason for that mentality, at least on this side of the world where they're native, because you go over to Europe and stuff, they love garter snakes. They think they're a treat. They think they're something super special, which they are. But over here
It's
in
because they're
North
native.
America, they are one of, if not the most widespread snake in North America. You can find them all over Canada and all over the States and even in Central America. So, and there's so many species that people don't even know about. But when you say garter snake, most people who live in North America have seen one or many or see them in their yard all the time. And again, as is consistent with human psychology, if you are exposed to something repeatedly or if something is deemed common or not rare, it loses value. And that's something I want to break because garter snakes are so common and you see them everywhere. And they're probably the first snake you encountered outside. I know it was the first snake I ever held or saw outside. That doesn't mean they're not special. And there are so many niche little species everywhere that people don't even know about and brilliantly colored ones that people have never even heard of. And then when they see them, they're like, wait, whoa, that's a garter snake? I'm like, yeah, they're cooler than you thought, aren't they? But not just their appearance, leaving that completely aside and leaving their value in the hobby completely aside, what they've evolved into is fascinating. They have such cool behaviors. The reason they're so widespread all over North America is because they can eat a wide variety of food. They can adapt to a wide variety of environments. There are some who are highly aquatic. There are others who are super far north in Canada and basically live as popsicles. And some of them eat specialized diets, others eat anything they can get their mouth on. And there are some who have even become resistant to certain toxins based on the prey they eat. So the most common example is There are certain species of garter snake who prey on newts who are highly toxic with tetrodotoxin, which, if you don't know, is a very potent toxin, and it can be very deadly depending on the size of the animal consuming it and the dose you're receiving. But garter snakes have developed, certain species have developed a resistance to it, and they're even able to store that tetrodotoxin in their liver, making them, if they've eaten it enough of it and recently enough, making them both poisonous and venomous. Because some people don't know this as well. Garter snakes are in fact venomous. They have posterior tooths, rear fangs, that can inject venom from a Duvernoy's gland. So they are able, which helps them subdue their prey. It's nothing that is super harmful to humans, although, like, any insect sting or any type of bite or toxin, everyone reacts differently to them. I personally, with garter snake bites, just get a little bit of swelling and itchiness. And if it's around like a joint, like a finger, I might feel a little bit of, like, I might lack range of motion for a couple days. That's about it. And that's an extreme case for me. Some people don't get affected by it at all. And other people I have seen have necrosis and huge swelling up their entire arm. So yeah, it varies, as anything does. But that aside, the part that makes them the most fascinating in my eyes is their social behavior. They are, I believe, the most studied, the common garter snake, the Amnophis certalis, I believe, is the most studied snake in the world. So we know a lot about them. And I think this probably has to do with how prevalent they are in North America and how easy they are to find and to encounter. And they're also really, they stand out a lot because of how social they are. If for those of you who have never heard of it before, in Canada, in Manitoba, there is a famous area called Narcisse where
I want to go this
I
year.
want to
Sorry,
go there
proceed.
too. I want to go there as well. Maybe we should plan a trip. I would love
Yes,
that.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
we should do that because I would love to go there. So in Manitoba, they're known for the big aggregation of garter snakes, the red-sided garter snakes, the Amnophis totalis paritalis. They cluster together for the winter, and they all hibernate in these rocky crevices. And then in the springtime, they all emerge together. I'm talking thousands of snakes that are all emerging at the same time. They are everywhere. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it is the most, like, the largest concentration of snakes present in one area. Like,
I believe you're right.
yeah, something. I may have worded it wrong, but you get what I mean. There's a lot of
Largest
freaking snakes.
congregation of snakes.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
the largest snake meetup in the world. But they all come out of brumation, out of hibernation at the same time, and then they create these big mating balls where there's multiple females or multiple males trying to mount one female, and they all create this big ball of snakes rolling around. It's so fascinating. The males have even been found to secrete female pheromones, so they mimic females, their scent, so that they can pull other males away from a female. And it's also been documented that they might do this as a form of anti-predator behavior. So by mimicking female pheromones and having a big cluster of males on this one male, they are now less likely to get picked off by a predator. Because obviously, if you're a predatory bird or something that could feed on a snake, that time of year in Manitoba would be like a buffet. You just reach down and grab as many snakes as you want. So it's also a big risk to these snakes. So I can see how the females would be more protected than the males because they're covered in males. It's basically like bodyguards everywhere. So the males mimicking the female pheromones and attracting a bunch of males to them, they're now being protected the same way a female would be. So it's just so fascinating, these behaviors they have. And that's just in the wild. In captivity, you get to see so much more, all the little subtleties in their behavior that you wouldn't catch in the wild. And that's why I love keeping them. I keep almost all my garter snakes in groups. I have one who is kept on his own, and I will eventually introduce him to a group. But I, again, love doing my little experiments. I wanted to see how he behaves on his own versus how all my other garter snakes who are kept in groups, how they behave. And oh my goodness, it is night and day, the difference. So the garter snakes that I keep in groups are, for the most part, again, they all have different personalities. Some species are known to be a little more defensive than others, while others are more friendly. But for the most part, the ones who are kept in groups, very confident. They will be out on display all day long. They're moving around their enclosure all day long. When I reach into the enclosure, they might have an initial startle because I'm a sudden presence, but then that soon turns into curiosity, and all the garter snakes will come to see me, often coming out of the enclosure, and I have to hold them and put them back in, and then I'm trying to fill their water bowl, and then they're coming back out and I have to put them back in, and they're super curious. It's wild. But the male that I keep on his own, and just want to make it clear, he used to be in a group. So I saw his behavior before, and he was behaving that same way. He was very curious and friendly and confident. Now that he's on his own, he is the total opposite. He is very skittish. He hides a lot. I don't see him as often. And when he is out basking on display, if I enter the room, he is very wary and he's keeping his eye on me. And if I make a sudden motion or if I come too close to the enclosure, he darts away. But the ones I keep in groups, nope. They might, again, like I said, they might get startled initially because I'm entering their enclosure and they're like, whoa, who's that? But soon after, that quickly turns into curiosity and they're all very confident. They're all on display. They eat very well. I've noticed that too. The ones who are in groups, they eat much more eagerly than the ones who are on their own. So it seems that they have that safety in numbers, as one might say, and they function better as a group. And that is just so fascinating to me because I think social behavior in in lizards are far more understood. Same with crocodilians. Oh my goodness, the social behaviors in crocodilians are fascinating and for some species very well studied. But for snakes, I think they operate very differently overall in their mannerisms and behaviors, that it's a lot more difficult to identify their behaviors and label them. And the garter snakes make it very evident. And again, this little experiment I did, keeping one on its own and others in groups and seeing the personality and the temperament and demeanor change in that one individual from being in a group versus being isolated, that tells me all I need to know. And now I'm looking forward to housing him in a group. And one thing I have to say about garter snakes, I have never encountered an issue with like combat or conflict. I see that with my lizards, like we previously mentioned, like little social orders and stuff. I have not noticed that with garter snakes. There's no one who's above one another. They're just they work in harmony together. There's no, you know, conflict at all. They just all get along and they kind of, it's like they're all little parts of one whole, kind of like ants. You know how ants, they all have a role, but evolutionarily speaking, the colony is what's successful. An individual ant is going to do nothing. It's going to die and it has no purpose. Sorry. But all the individual ants together create this harmony. You notice how I've been using the word harmony a lot? I think it's a good word for it.
I like it. It's a good word. I like it.
Yes,
Why not?
exactly.
Yeah.
But I need synonyms here.
An army of harmony. Harmony.
An army of harmony. Oh my gosh. You're giving me ideas now. I'm going to make a t-shirt.
I love it. There we go.
Yeah. But I noticed that with garter snakes too. There's no kind of one entity versus another entity. And if they don't collaborate, there will be conflict. But if they collaborate, there will be harmony. No, it's kind of like they just exist together and they exist better together. Now, I need to be a little bit careful when I'm feeding them. And that has nothing to do with defensiveness or aggression, but they lose their ability to think critically when they are hungry and they smell food and they start eating anything around them. If that is the
Each other.
glass of the enclosure, if that is a leaf, if that is a branch, if anything smells like their prey item, they will go crazy and attempt to eat it. And I have noticed though, when they encounter the other snakes in their enclosure, they usually kind of pull their head back really quickly, like, oh, I cannot bite that. Oh, I cannot, try to eat that. So they recognize each other. But where there's sometimes issues is if one garter snake has a piece of, let's say I'm feeding them fish, tilapia, has a piece of tilapia in its mouth, and then the other snake grabs the other end of it, not knowing that there's another snake at the other end. They will both eat towards the middle, like Lady and the Tramp. And that's where they might encounter some issues where they won't eat each other, but they might like bite each other's top lip or something. So I need to make sure that I keep an eye on them and I'm hands on when I'm feeding them so that they don't do any silly mistakes. But that's really the only issue I encounter with keeping them in a group. And again, that has nothing to do with, conflict or combat between two of them. It's just they're not the brightest when they're hungry, and they don't really think about the consequences of their behavior. I've had them bite me when they're hungry, the ones that are normally very friendly. I've seen some biting the glass and dragging their mouth across the glass. They're just not the brightest at times. But
Super
other than
jerky.
that, they are no problem at all to keep in groups. And as I have witnessed, and as many other garter snake keepers might tell you, they do better in groups. And I would recommend anyone who wants to keep garter snakes to keep them in groups, preferably with the same species, if not with the same species of the same sex, because you don't want different species breeding with one another and creating hybrids, and now you have a whole other issue.
Yeah, for sure. Is that a thing that happens in the garter snake niche? Is
Yes.
cohabiting different males of different species and also hybridization, I guess?
Yes, and I have an example of that, not from
Cool.
my own doing, but one of my most beloved snakes that I love the most and that my followers love the most is Saphira. She is a beautiful blue garter snake, and everyone always asks me what species she is, and I'm always so reluctant to tell them because the truth of the matter is she is a hybrid or an intergrade between an eastern garter snake, Thamnophis sertalis, and a California red-sided garter snake, Thamnophis sertalis infernalis. And what happened with her is her previous owner had a group together, and I guess the keeper thought they were all the same sex. So wasn't 100% sure on the sex and ended up having two different subspecies breed with one another and produce these babies. So I ended up buying her, not directly from the buyer, the seller. Wow, words are difficult right now. She was passed along the hobby for a little bit, and then I ended up getting my hands on her, and I'm like, she is going to be mine forever for two reasons: because she's beautiful and I love her, and because I don't want her to now be bred with something else, and now you just have this mutt of a snake being created in the hobby. So there are different opinions with hybridization with garter snakes, as if with many other snakes and lizards. So I guess that's up to the individual to have their own preference. But the way I see it is, why cross different snakes, and especially garter snakes, if there are species out there that are so beautiful on their own. Especially garter snakes, people don't realize how many species and subspecies exist. You can pretty much get them in every color and pattern you can think of. And so there's really no point to me to be hybridizing them and now ruining an entire pure bloodline and stopping it right there, and now creating these, you know, hybrids that don't always look as pretty as you'd think. Some people are like, well, if I breed this really colorful one with this one, I'm going to get a super colorful one. And then you get this really muddy, gross garter snake that doesn't even look that good. So it usually doesn't meet people's expectations anyways. And there are really cool morphs out there. So if morphs are your thing, there are garter snakes that are pure. They're not hybrids. But there are these wicked morphs, bright reds, bright blues, bright yellows, bright greens. So I think there's so many other aspects of the hobby you could find a passion towards before hybridizing them, but that's just my opinion. I am not going to publicly shame anyone. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest issue is with the people. People will sell hybrids and claim that they are pure species, and now you're selling it to someone who's misinformed, and they're now their dream to create pure beautiful lines of the species is now broken because you lied to them. So honestly, I think at the end of the day my problem is just with people, which, does that really surprise you? People are always a problem.
I was literally waiting. 100%. That is the biggest issue with
Yeah.
it all. For my, it is people. It's people that are not
Yeah.
going to disclose what that species is,
Exactly.
or like either on purpose or by accident. Like you said,
Yeah.
someone may sell it, then they may breed it thinking that their line is pure. And now they,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
it
if
becomes a
you
mess.
do
And
breed
that's the most
hybrids and if you do sell them, just be honest, you know, even if people agree with it or not. I think in that scenario, whatever your opinion is, just do the right thing. If you create a hybrid and you sell them, make sure you're transparent and you tell people it's a hybrid and you tell them what the species are that it's hybridized with. And then hopefully the hobby will still have space for the purists and the people who are okay with hybridization. That's how I see it.
I love it. And since we're already at the point of you already giving great advice, maybe we'll grab the question that I was going to wrap up on, but we'll put it in now. What, if anything, would you like to leave the people listening to this episode with? What is your best advice for reptile keepers and or potential non-reptile keepers that are becoming reptile keepers?
Okay. I guess I have two words of advice. The first one's a little cheesy and corny, but it's true. Work with species or have projects that you are passionate about. Don't do it because you think it's cool or it's, you know, inflated on social media and it's cool and it's trendy. If those trends are truly what you find passion in, that's fine. But make sure your motives and the purpose why you're doing what you're doing is authentic and true. That's why I also earlier on in this podcast said that as influencers, you don't have to breed. You can if you want. You don't have to, but you have no obligation to behave a certain way. All people expect of you is to follow your passion and to do it as ethically as you possibly can and to do right by the animal and by other hobbyists. So that's my advice. First of all, the very cheesy one. Second one is a little more specific. If you are a reptile keeper or an animal keeper and you keep at home or you have an interest in doing it, obviously when you're researching your animal, look at all the care guides, look at YouTube videos about other keepers are doing, but look at actual research of the species in the wild. You will learn so much from that. Or go out there yourself. I know that's easier said than done. There's many places I would love to travel and animals I would love to see, but going herping in other countries was the most humbling experience for me because I could see what these animals really live with and what they encounter. And I came home and I wanted to change everything. When I went to Colombia, I realized how deep leaf litter is on the forest floor. I was going up to my knees. And I'm like, okay, my little 2-inch layer of leaf litter is maybe not that much. I'm going to give them more leaf litter. So, you know, just these little things that you can learn by stepping outside or by just doing research, actual like empirical data and research studies. Go on Google Scholar, get textbooks. Oftentimes at reptile expos, there are booths with textbooks and books and stuff like that. Grab yourself a couple, even if you don't read. I'm not a big reader, but when it comes to textbooks and learning more about animals, I will do anything I have to. So I highly recommend looking for actual evidence and studies on what goes on in the wild, not just what people have been doing in the hobby, because it's not always right. Just because it's been done for a while doesn't mean it's necessarily right. So, my opinion, take some of the information from the hobby and take some information from studies of what's actually going on in the wild and find an even middle. And then you should be pretty happy with how you're keeping your animals, in my opinion.
Another mic drop. I love it. I love it. Actually, I'm glad you did bring up Colombia and all that because it was one of the things I did want to touch on this
Yeah.
on this episode, but it kind of shifted completely And I love that it shifted because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah,
But maybe we will quickly touch on it.
I'd love
Um,
to.
what was it like being out there? And I don't know if you saw any species like you mentioned. I don't know if you saw any species that you do currently keep. And you did just mention the leaf litter concept. But what was the feeling of being out there and kind of seeing these animals and being like, what was the train of thought? What was going through your head? Like, maybe give us a quick summary of that.
Absolutely. Honestly, it was probably the most overwhelming feeling in the world in the best way, but there's so much to take in. I've only really gone herping here in Ontario and in a few places in the States, but being in the Choco in Colombia was a completely different experience. It was extremely challenging, and anyone who is on that expedition will say the same thing. But it was very humbling, is how I have to say it, because you see what these animals are presented with. You also see the troubles are presented with, and why so many of the species we were looking for are critically endangered because of people, because of poaching. And it really takes you back to square one. And I'm not going to lie, it made me feel really guilty as a keeper. I will get on to the positive stuff about the trip because it was a very positive experience, but I think it's important to mention as well that I seeing the vast land and all the different little micro habitats they have and everything they encounter in the wild, and then thinking about my animals at home, inevitably I felt guilty. I'm like, at the end of the day, no matter how well I'm keeping my animals and how big of an enclosure they have, at the end of the day, I'm keeping animals in a box. I know that sounds horrible, but I think every keeper deep down has a little bit of that guilt there. And we just have to do it as well as we possibly can for our animals. Even if our animals are chilling and they're like, I don't know what the problem is. I don't have predators. I get food handed to me. I'm living a good life. Whatever their opinion is in the enclosures, I still feel guilty because going out in the wild and just seeing how they are out there, you just cannot meet that ever. No zoo can even meet that. It's a whole other experience. That being said, it was magical. It was the best experience of my life. It was the best trip I've ever been on, the best place I've ever visited in the world. I still have a lot of places to visit, so I might exceed it, it might not, but it was incredible. And I didn't see any species I keep at home, but the friends I went with keep a lot of poison frogs, or dart frogs as we call them in the hobby. And that was our target species for this expedition, was a variety of Ufaga and Philobactes, like the golden dart frog, which is the most
Is that how they say it
poisonous,
over there?
most toxic land vertebrate. And it was right in front of me, inches from my face. That's what I mean when I say humbling. I mean something that could literally kill you and you're staring at it and it's right there in front of you. So it was humbling and mesmerizing, and I learned so much, and I deepened my relationship with my friends. So overall it was just honestly best experience of my life. And if nothing beats that, I will be satisfied.
That is awesome. Yeah, the pictures you guys all came home with and like the stuff I saw, it looked like an incredible trip. And those frogs look so good too. How
Yeah.
hard was it, I guess, to find them? Was it like I always ask people this when they go herping.
Yeah.
Was it like you were walking for hours to see one frog, or was it like you walked for 1 hour and saw 100 frogs?
Okay, so great question. That depends first on the species, where we were, and who we were going with. So, for some species, they were in areas that we couldn't really access. So, our local guides would go find them and bring them back to us while we were herping in easier locations. Because I swear they were like doing parkour up these mountainsides, and then they'd come down with a frog, and you're like, oh, okay, thanks for that.
That's hilarious.
Other species, we spent an entire day climbing up the side of a freaking mountain and rising in elevation, and we're dying and we feel nauseous. Some of us were puking, some of us were struggling a lot. All of us were struggling a lot just to find nothing. So that's the reality of herping too. Some of the species we were looking for are critically endangered, and their entire range as a species were only a few square kilometers, and we still wouldn't find them. So it's crazy. Now, the ones we were able to find as fellow Canadian herpers who have no idea what we're doing in Colombia, oftentimes we were following the calls of the males. So we would be in the area where we know we can encounter that species, and we would listen. And then we would hear the males calling, and we would follow the call, and then it would get louder and louder, and then we would be able to identify them. Now, some were just incredibly bold, like the Philobates terribilis, the golden dart frogs. They are extremely bold because they know their power, they know how toxic they are, and anyone who keeps them in the hobby can assert to that too. They're extremely bold frogs. They're not shy at all. You can go in and pretty much touch them or get your camera right up in their face and they will not move. And they're like that in the wild too. That has nothing to do with captivity because they know, how powerful they are. So those were easier to find than some others because they weren't hiding under leaf litter. They weren't hiding in nooks and crannies. They were just standing out there all proud with their arms all puffed out, ready
They're
to
like the
take on the
bulldogs of the
world.
French world.
Yeah.
You
So those were easier to find at times because they were just presenting themselves to us. You just had to look for the little colorful dots jumping around on the leaf litter. But yeah, it was really fun. And obviously, even though our target species were poison frogs, we found an abundance of snakes and lizards and stuff. And I was quite impressed with myself. I found a brown vine snake who was kind of up a very steep hill, like a mossy wall with branches and tree roots and stuff. And somehow I noticed it in a tree. And when I tell you it looked exactly like the branch and it was not moving, I have no idea how I spotted it. But I did, and I'm proud of myself for it. And I think I have a video of it on Instagram where I actually climb up the tree and then I grab it with my one hand. So even though our target species were all frogs, you're in the middle of the jungle, you'll find anything. So everyone else, I would say, were kind of peeling their eyes mostly for frogs. And then I'd say me and Nick, we were both looking for invertebrates, for frogs, for snakes, for lizards. We were a little bit more open to everything else. Of course, everyone else were finding things too, but I think the others were more excited by the frogs. And I was like, I want to find as much as I can find, no matter what it is. So I was always finding the cool invertebrates too, spiders, mantids, and other cool beetles and stuff. So it was an amazing experience, and I would 100% go again. But I would only go with CR Wild, the two, Caesar and Christian. They organized it perfectly, and we all know Colombia has a certain I don't want to be nice about it, but they have a reputation.
Concern.
A safety reputation. Yeah.
Yes.
Like I work in reinsurance and we decline people who travel to Colombia for life insurance. So that doesn't tell you enough.
Cool.
Yeah. So
good to know.
So again, that might be a generalization too, because I know some areas we were in were safe, but we were with Christian and Caesar and we were safe, and they had everything mapped out for us, and they knew the local guides, so we were in good hands the entire expedition, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. So shout out to CR Wild. I'm alive still.
Nice. Alive and ready to take another trip. I was gonna ask, so you said it was tough, but you also said one of the greatest experiences of your life. Would you do it again? And then would you do it again, or would you prefer to go somewhere different?
I would do it again, but before I would do it again, I'd rather go somewhere different. And there is some discussion with me and my herping group as to where we might go next with CR Wild. So I'm going to keep that a secret, but I will say it's not Colombia, and it is in South America. So I don't know when, but
stay tuned. Stay tuned,
people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Well, once you have details on that, let me know. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, Kayla, on that note, I know you're prepping for 2 very interesting weeks coming up. You're going to AnimalCon, you're going to Tinley.
Yes, I am.
So I will let you go and get ready for all of those things.
Thank
I
you.
will say, once you are back, please come back and let us know how those went.
Yeah.
And we can do some more interesting conversations about social behavior,
Absolutely. Let's do
and
it.
also just your entire collection, because we barely scratched the surface. So
Yes, of course.
yes, thank you very much for coming on. This was fascinating. The episode, you dictated the topic somehow through a
The
tangent,
episode.
and it became 10 times better than what I was
I
hoping.
took your outline and your brainstorm and I crumbled it up and I threw it away. And I was like, I'm taking the lead.
This is so much better. This is so much better. I'm so glad you did
Thank
that.
you. I'm glad.
So yeah, thank you very much. Not that it's needed, but can you let everybody know where they can find you?
Absolutely. So I am most active on Instagram and YouTube. On Instagram, you can find me at kayla's.critters. And on Instagram, yeah, I got to get the dot right. Someone took the other username. And on YouTube, you can find me under my name, Kayla Roach. And yes, Roach like cockroach. That is, in fact, my legal name.
Can you send me the JPEG review or whatever it is, the PNG of you of the roach you use, so
yes,
I can just
the
prop it in there?
I will.
Kayla Roach, I love it. I love it. Every time I watch one of you, I just wait for it because it kills me. But yes, those links, if you're not already following Kayla, you should be. But those links will be, just in case, in the description. Go give her a follow. Go check out the YouTube channel. And Kayla, once again, thank you very, very much for coming on. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the discussion.
For me too. And everyone else, like I said, you will hear from Kayla again very, very soon. Thank you all very much for listening. She will be back. We will see you on the next one.